Awesome, y'all. What a privilege and honor to have our next guest, Dr. Nathan Daughtrey. I hope I did pronounce that right.
You did.
Awesome. And welcome to the first year of the International Euphonium Summit here virtually. Welcome. Such an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Dr. Nathan Daughtrey is a composer and percussionist who owns C. Allen Publications, a publisher of works for wind ensembles, string orchestras, jazz ensembles, percussion ensemble, brass band, and other instrumental solo and ensemble combinations. In the low brass community, he is best known for his euphonium percussion duet Spitfire, and his work for euphonium and percussion quintet Coming Home, which won first place in the ITEA Harvey Phillips Award for Excellence in Composition in 2014, with euphonium being in the solo role. And wow, that Spitfire has been an amazing work in its own right. And I have been looking forward to this interview since, my interview with Dr. Brian Meixner and him spilling the beans about all of, kind of how he went with Praxis and his relationship with you, and every providing the rich background to this. So if you haven't listened to Dr. Brian Meixner's interview on the International Euphonium Summit, I highly recommend going and checking that out, listening to it, reading it. In tangent of this or before, welcome, Dr. Nathan Daughtrey.
Thank you.
So let's get into the interview and move this conversation along and cover the composition aspect, because that's why we're here, is highlighting the euphonium and your Spitfire composition particularly. When did you start composing?
So I started composing around 1999, 2000. So this is the first year of my DMA at UNC Greensboro. And I was just like, my office mate was like, hey, I was thinking about taking secondary comp lessons. And I was like, well, that sounds like fun. So we were both kind of independently taking secondary composition lessons, just 30-minute lesson once a week. And so I went into my first lesson with 16 bars of a solo piano piece. I started out playing piano when I was a child, so that's always been near and dear to my heart. So yeah, that's kind of how I started. And he just kept throwing projects at me, composition projects, no euphonium, but some other wind instruments. And yeah, and being a percussionist, we're always hungry for new literature. So, naturally I gravitated toward writing for percussion. And, as with anything, the more you write, the kind of the grander the piece becomes, or the ensemble that you're writing for, the numbers that you're writing for. So, yeah, so that was it. 1999, 2000, around in there.
So you said you'd walked in with a 16-bar kind of piano solo work. Did you ever draw that out even more to become its own work?
Yeah. So, it was kind of, here's 16 bars of music. I don't know where to take this next, So that's a lot of how I was able to use those lessons was, what next? How do I get from point A to point B? I have this idea and this idea. How do I connect them? So that was really useful. I didn't realize until going into those lessons that I had any ideas or any desire to really compose much beyond that. But yeah, my love for it really grew across the time that I spent in those lessons. So yeah, it was 16 bars, and he was like, well, what if you took like this part of the phrase or this motive or whatever and expanded that out, and what if you started exploring this key area from here. And so yeah, it turned into a 3-movement piece for piano that ended up being the third movement, and so I wrote kind of a improvisatory sounding first movement. Then the second movement was much more introspective, and the third movement was much more dance-like. So it was just a little suite of three movements for piano. And then after that, I scored it out for percussion ensembles, directed one of the percussion ensembles at UNC Greensboro. And I needed a slow piece. So I started out with the middle movement of that. I'm like, actually, I think these outer movements might be really cool too. So yeah, so it turned into something else down the road.
That's really awesome in that you didn't discard that original, in a way, idea, and you proliferated that even more and made that idea grow into something that you probably never really foresaw happening down the road.
Right. Yeah.
That's awesome. When did you first involve or first consider euphonium to be part of compositions?
So it was after I started writing music for wind band. And so my first couple of pieces for band were really kind of opposite ends of the difficulty spectrum. So I had a piece for large percussion ensemble, 10-player percussion ensemble that I had written called Limerick Daydreams, and it's like 12-minute piece, and it's very tuneful. It's based on an Irish reel. And so all the thematic material comes out of that, but it's still, it's a very original piece outside of it being based on something I didn't write. So I thought that it might work really well for wind bands. So I scored that out. So it's, a grade 5.5, 6.5 wind ensemble. And so there are a couple of really, really nice euphonium solos in that. We'll get to this later, I'm sure, but so the publishing company that I own now, Sea Island Publications, I've been with the company for over 20 years now, like working for the company. So we publish all the music of David Gillingham. And so, if you're familiar with his wind band works, which is the bulk of what he's written some really great euphonium parts in those pieces. So I think there was a lot of that influence. I'm like, I can do it. Well, you can do so much more, with euphonium than you can some of the other brass instruments, I think, in that range, right? So I had fun with that. And so there's a euphonium player named Christian Folk, who reached out to me when he was still in high school. And he reached out to me about writing a piece for him, and just a piece for euphonium and piano. And the reason he reached out to me was because he ended up playing those solos in like South Carolina All-State Band from Limerick Daydreams, right?
Wow.
And so that was why he reached out to me to write this piece. And it wasn't anything for euphonium and percussion. It was euphonium and in a very traditional solo with piano roll. And it was very, very specific, right? I want it to go through this emotion or this feeling, really on down the road. His grandmother was ill and coming toward the end of her life, so it was dedicated to her, and he wanted it based on a specific hymn. And so anyway, so that piece ended up turning into my piece Coming Home. So the original version of that is for euphonium and piano, and then as we were getting toward the album with Brian Meixner, the Praxis album, we were trying to figure out another tune to add to the piece, and I'm like, let me see how I can maybe work this out for euphonium and percussion quintet. And so that's how that came to be. So yeah, it was Christian Folk that kind of pulled me into the low brass world.
Well, he must have loved the solos that he was playing during that All-State Festival.
Yeah.
You wrote something that really inspired him, and to take that initiative. Did you get to meet him while he was at the All-State Festival?
So I ended up accompanying him at the premiere of the piece. I played the piano
Oh,
at the
okay.
premiere. Yeah, and it was like a solo ensemble competition that was a part, or festival that was a part of that. So yeah, yeah.
That's really
So for sure,
awesome.
yeah. And for sure, we've kept in touch over those couple of decades. Yeah.
Right. How was it when you were writing the solo and going back and forth with its evolution, or did you just pen it once and then done, or did he send it back for rewrites, or how did that
Well,
happen?
so I'm not great at sharing pieces that are unfinished with, even with the people that are paying me to write them. I just, it just feels unnatural to me to say, here's kind of where we're going, right? And I know as a performer that it's commissioned people. You get impatient. You really just want to see what it is, even if it's unfinished. But I'm such a perfectionist. I just don't want to share an unfinished thing, right? So he had, as we were talking about it, he gave me, his tessitura, what's the best range to write in for him. And, he was a high school student. So and it was the first time that I was writing for Euphonium. And so I mistook the range, the upper end of the range, an octave lower than what he had said.
Oh man.
And so when I delivered it to him, he was like, I love this, but it sits a little bit low. Or could you expand out up and toward the top end of the range that I had shared? I'm like, oh, oops. So I ended up reworking some of the passages, getting up into those notes
The double octaves and
up
such.
above middle C, and
Yeah.
yeah, and those sections ended up being all the better for that. Kind of it let it sing a lot more than I had originally written. So yeah, so that was kind of a happy mistake. But the form was there, right? The way that
Right.
the piece evolved, all of that was there. He didn't want any changes about that. It was just kind of, let's get up a little bit higher here.
So when you took, so the composers that are listening to this, and that haven't really written for Euphonium yet, because obviously they're intrigued because they're listening to this interview or reading these words, or however, what advice, and this isn't part of the questionnaire at all, it's just something that popped into my head. Uh, what advice would you give them to work that frame of mind of, and kind of massage that idea of combining their talent with writing for Euphonium?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think just like any other instrument that you're writing for that you aren't intimately familiar with, is getting actual people to play what you're writing. I mean, anything can exist in a vacuum. I've seen people just in the past couple days, performers or directors complaining about this or that, in that, the composer or arranger has written something that just notationally doesn't make sense. Not even technically, just notationally, it doesn't make sense. Like alternating back and forth between E flat and E natural, for example, instead of D sharp and E, and going back and forth like that. So yeah, so to back up, I mean, just getting people to look at your music and play through it, and you listen to it and say, oh, okay, well, if I slur the C up to a G, that's what it sounds like. But if I have them tongue it, that's what it sounds like. If I have them play it staccato, that's just all the things, and just getting familiar with all the various ranges of the instrument, and what kind of dexterity professional players are going to have in each of those areas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what I love about writing for Euphonium is that there's so much more dexterity, when it comes to writing more technical passages, right? That you just don't get from some of the other brass instruments. So that's what I love about it. Not only that, but being a percussionist, I feel like euphonium players and tuba players are kind of kindred spirits to percussionists, right? Because our literature is still so young.
It is.
Especially euphonium players, it's still so young. And, so we're just, there are a lot of euphonium composers, right? There are a lot of percussionist composers, and we just want to keep putting new stuff out there that works well on our instrument, but also pushes us further technically and musically and et cetera.
And I think that's one of the biggest highlights of this International Euphonium Summit is taking this instrument, the one that we're doing this based off of, the euphonium, to the next level. And can you be, and speaking to the artist or the composer who's on the other side of this, of our interview here, is could you take our instrument to the next level? Are you willing to, or do you want to, or how could you? Those questions. I mean, listening to Spitfire or any of the other amazing works that you've listed for sale and with the links below, Christian Folk being one of your first, was he the first commission that you took on
for euphonium? Yeah,
euphonium. Yes. Okay, that's cool. How many are you currently working on? Any euphonium commissions?
I am. I won't give you a ton of details on it because I haven't seen anybody else talk about it. But so there's a middle school band that's been invited to play at the Midwest Clinic up in Chicago in December, and so they're going to have a professional euphonium player perform with them. And so I've been commissioned to write a piece for professional euphonium and like grade 2, grade 3 band.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. So it'll be about a 5-minute work. And so I'm trying to wrap that up right now.
Awesome.
So, and the way that I've approached that one, they wanted they're familiar with my percussion ensemble works as well as my band pieces. And so knowing that I write a little bit beyond the grade level for the wind parts, they're like, all right, if you can aim for this, knowing that we'll get this. But they said percussion, you can write a level above all the wind players because we know, what you do there. So that's been really fun to lean into the percussion part of the wind band on there. But basically it's a theme of variation, and each variation has a different section of the ensemble accompanying. So percussion, brass, woodwinds, and then it'll be 2D at the end. So that's been a lot of fun, and looking forward to sharing that with the world in December. Yeah,
absolutely. I'm looking forward to hearing that, and possibly live too. What a treat. So that's interesting that this middle school band director thought when commissioning you, what you already write and what your capabilities are, took that into consideration. So when you're commissioning or being commissioned, hopefully that you'd be willing to take into consideration their expertise, the instruments that they're intimate with, and be more than okay with them going nuts over like what they're good at and letting them shine as well, like this middle school band director did with you in commissioning this piece. I mean, what really cool. And they're like, yeah, just do what you do with the percussion parts, and
well, I mean, with any commission, you never know how many people they've gone through before they got to you either. So, it could have been they had gone through 3 or 4 people, but also kind of knew they had me in their back pocket, like, well, he can write for this, we know he can write for this. So you just never know, but it's certainly an honor to be asked to write a piece. And especially for this soloist, I can't wait to hear them play it. So,
oh man, I think you almost like wanted to say it,
nope,
but we're not.
Nope, I've got it.
No,
Yep.
okay.
Yep, locked away.
Okay, I guess we'll have to just wait to see uh, who that performing artist is going to be and be honored by premiering this work. What a treat! So, when did you, being a percussionist and a composer, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The
Yeah.
percussion or composition, or was it kind of a juxtaposition or a mixture of both at the same time?
So I was when I started taking the secondary composition lessons, I was working on my DMA in percussion.
Okay,
So I had been playing percussion for a while, and I mean I really had not played around with composition at all during my undergrad. The closest that I came during my master's was to adapt some pieces for marimba that were not written for marimba. So, guitar pieces, piano pieces, and such. So, when I am talking to a group of young percussionists about kind of getting your feet wet, writing for your instrument, I always kind of start there with adapting something, right? Because you're not having to come up with something from scratch. You're starting with something that somebody else wrote, and you're figuring out how to make it work on your instrument. And you guys do the same thing with like cello
absolutely,
literature, right?
absolutely, yeah.
Um, so there's that, and then doing some kind of arrangements. You're still taking something that already existed, but you're maybe putting your own spin on it, or you're just figuring out how to add accompaniment to it. And then from there, original or improvisation, original composition, and from there you're just arranging your own music, right? You write a tune, you figure out how to harmonize it, and you figure out how to arrange it and where to take it next. So yeah, so that's it. Percussion came first for sure, and then composition. And since the composition, I wasn't writing anything for myself for gosh, at least 4 years. I wasn't writing anything original that I would be performing in a solo setting. We have so many marimba solos out there. I focus on marimba and vibraphone in my solo performance, and there's so many of those solos already out there. And I'm so judgmental of them that I didn't want to be judgmental of my own pieces. So I just kind of put it aside until somebody had commissioned me to write Dr. Lisa Rogers at Texas Tech University had commissioned me to write a vibraphone concerto. And so once she had performed it a bit, I started championing the piece a bit too, and had performed it with a few ensembles. And from there, I've written a lot more chamber pieces that involve percussion and non-percussion, like Spitfire. And yeah, so I've started performing things and just trying to meld the things that I love of performing and composing.
So when did you fully take note of, pun intended, take note, when did you first realize that this was, the composition part was going to be really like a really integral part to what you're doing even now today?
I think it was once some of my pieces started getting some traction and getting performances. So this would have been around 2003, 2004. So this is back in the days when publishing companies put out sampler CDs. We're kind of beyond that now, right? And so all of my music is published by Seattle Publications. And so we were, for the first time, putting out sampler CDs for percussion ensemble. And that was all I was really writing for at that time. And so I had, 2 or 3 pieces that were on those first sampler CDs. And so these are CDs that went out to, tens of thousands of middle and high schools around the country. And yeah, so they gravitated, or some people gravitated toward those pieces, and that I guess I started realizing, I could, have some success doing this, it's still not an area where I can just drop everything
Right.
and that's, how I make my living. Perhaps if I dropped everything and tried to make that my living, I would have that success, but I love all the other things that make up my career. So
Yeah,
I don't want to
absolutely.
drop everything, so yeah, I think that was it. Once I realized that things were, actually being performed, more than, you know, 2 or 3 times in their lifetime, right? I mean, I think that's a lot of what happens with contemporary composition is, you get the premiere performance, and you're lucky if you get another one. So I felt very fortunate that people were picking up these pieces and doing
That's
them.
awesome. So
Yeah.
what would you say would be your inspiration for, like, if you're when you're writing a new piece, particularly or not with Euphonium, what's your inspiration of, like, writing a new work?
Well,
Or is it just a
it,
commission?
it's a combination of those things. So, of course, when I get commissioned by somebody, I get kind of the laundry list of
Right.
salient elements that they want in the piece. I mean, simple things: the duration, perhaps the difficulty level, instrumentation, mood. Sometimes if somebody wants something slow and lyrical, they'll say that, or if they want something, or they'll reference like something else that I wrote, and say I want something that's maybe a cross between this piece and this piece. But then outside of, like, that's just the really basic starting point. It's so helpful to have those parameters, right? To know, okay, they want something between 5 and 7 minutes. Great. And you can really outline that and figure out how to get from, get up to 5 to 7 minutes. But for me, I love finding inspiration that's outside of the music itself. So digging into to poetry, or books, artwork, anything kind of outside of music. I love digging into those things. Something else I do just as a tool to get out of my head a little bit, when developing the first thematic material, and it's something that maybe makes it special and unique to the person that's commissioned me, is that I will take their name or the school's name or something and transform those letters into pitches, into chromatic pitches.
Like Bach did.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
and I
awesome.
mean, like any number of people have done. It's certainly not an original thing, but
Right.
it's something that I can do in my little notebook, right? And then go to the piano and kind of tinker through it, and harmonize it, and improvise on it and see if it's something, right? If it, sometimes you get those and it's not something that anybody wants to hear. It's not something that I'm inspired by, but sometimes, like, the stars align and it's just a magical collection of pitches. So yeah,
When did
so
you?
that's it. Yeah.
So you mentioned that you started on piano with your whole musical start in this journey. When did you? You said age 11. You said you started playing
Or
piano.
age 4.
Age 4. Wow. Uh,
Yeah, so I took piano all the way through high school. Yeah.
wow. That's awesome. Because I see a lot of composers do start out with piano, and so having that background and working towards something for so long be such an applicable skill, such a skill that is very useful for a composer, is really there. I don't know if I would say that there's anything better, a better start for a composer to really have a foundation for.
It's certainly helpful. I mean, we're doing the same thing with our 7-year-old daughter. She's going in her second year of taking piano lessons, but she's also taking dance, and like she's going to be in the Nutcracker this coming holiday season, and our deal is that if you're going to continue taking dance, you need to continue taking piano, or you need to, continue taking some other kind of music lesson, because the things you learn there, from rhythm to melody to harmony and note value and just keeping time, are so important to everything that she's experiencing in dance. So yeah, I mean, I think it's helpful for any number of things, for sure.
That's awesome. You mentioned poetry, art, and what are some of the, I guess, what's your favorite poem that you like to go to kind of reread and to draw that inspiration from? Do you have a favorite poem? Or is it just poetry in general?
It's poetry in general, and so I am pretty fickle in that I go from poem to poem as I it works through pieces, right? And it's not always a poem, but that's certainly the majority of creative inspiration that I gravitate toward. So let me think. Actually, there's a book of short stories.
You can send it to me after.
Yeah,
And
I'm blanking on the name of it. I'll come up. It's called Consolations, and I actually heard about it. They had the author on, David White, Whyte. I think he's British. So he was on NPR several years ago, and it's this collection of little. They're not even short stories. They're essays, and they're just essays on. Each one is like human emotion, right? And so he dives into that human emotion and what it means to him, and he kind of defines it, but in a really eloquent way. So anyway, I was right in the middle of writing this collection of 15 duets for keyboard percussion. There was a commission, and I think I had already finished all 15 of the pieces, but I went back after hearing him talk about these and read some of the essays. I bought the book and kind of went through all of the 15 pieces and put titles on them, because they were just number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through 15, and figured out the moods that best align with those, because I just loved the way that he approached it. So that was kind of applying the inspiration after the fact. But yeah,
a lot of you're exactly right. After the fact is like when a lot of what we do is, what we have to recollect and see what really inspired us, or we don't have the words that we necessarily feel at that moment or define that. And you took that really awesome collection and mirrored, just like our back screen on the Zoom here, mirrored that into the works that you were penning by hand at that moment.
Yeah,
that's really awesome. That's really cool. So what kind of equipment do you use when writing music right now, as opposed to 20 years ago when you started?
Yeah, it's not all that different, honestly. I'm very simple in the way that I approach it, and very, I guess, simple, minimal. I mean, goodness, it's always just been a computer and a well, I can't share that on there. Yeah, MIDI keyboard and headphones, and I'm good to go.
That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, we of course expand out to some things that are kind of superfluous, but yeah, it's always been the same. And I've always composed in Finale since version 3.72, I think. So I've kind of followed all along, and so I'm an expert in it by now, right? And I think with any of the notation programs, just becoming an expert in it and making it so that it just looks like a beautiful piece of music. It doesn't look like it was written in that program. Most of the time I can see something that somebody printed out and say, oh, well, that was done in Sibelius. Oh, that was done in Finale. Oh, that was done in Dorico, and on down the line. But anyway, so I've always used the same software. I'm working on simultaneously with writing this piece for Euphonium and Wind Ensemble. I'm writing a marimba duet with fixed media, and that's a bit more outside of my comfort zone. All of the electronic stuff, some of it's I recorded my daughter speaking some poetry, so I'm using some of her voice in it, but most of the other sounds are electronic sounds in there. So I know a lot of composers compose exclusively in a DAW, like Logic Pro, which is what I'm writing the electronic stuff in, and then they'll notate it out in its entirety. And my brain just doesn't function that way. I've always been a notation person, so that just the process of writing that piece is challenging for me. So I have external monitor connected to my computer. So I have the Logic timeline over here, and then I have Finale open over here, and I'm kind of going back and forth, notating stuff out or playing around in Logic and then figuring out how to notate it out and just going back and forth. So that's really the only additional piece of equipment. I've gone through several MIDI keyboards over the years, but they all serve the same purpose.
So do you like to take other artists or other compositions? Do you find inspiration in other compositions from composers? And do you kind of gravitate to, as a publication company owner, you look at all these various scores that are submitted, and do you see certain elements that have potential that you find inspiration from in that moment? You're like, oh, that's really cool. That might work over here, or, how do you approach that?
Yes, but maybe not completely consciously. So many things come across your desk, or you're listening to this, listening to that. When I'm at my desk at the publishing company, and if I'm doing any editing or other tasks, I always have music going, and it's not music from the publishing company. It's like some contemporary chamber album that just came out, or a movie score, or new national album, or whatever it happens to be. There's a lot of different kinds of music that's going through my ears. So I haven't really done that intentionally or consciously, but I can certainly go through my pieces and hear different influences from that time period.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. But I don't do it. I don't really do it intentionally.
Gotcha.
So try to not steal too much.
So in commissioning, when you bring on, or when you accept a commission, what's your process to evaluate that project? Or do you take the venue into evaluate? Do you evaluate kind of where they're going to be performing as well, in regards to the complexity overall?
Yeah, there's so many potential factors, right? So I know that the piece that I'm writing right now for Euphonium and Band is going to be performed in front of a pretty sizable audience in Chicago. But at the end of the day, you're just trying to write the best thing that you can in that given moment, right? So I don't put more or less effort into a piece depending on who's going to hear it, if that's where you're going.
It does. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's very interesting to have you on for the International Euphonium Summit and the composers that are watching, because you own a publication house, you own a publishing company. And so it's, when I developed this questionnaire and wrote the question of when did you start competing in competitions and submitting to publishers, this becomes a new evolution to that, because you are the publisher in a way.
Right.
How to rephrase that and reframe that for our audience, with your expertise, for those that and if you would like to elaborate on kind of as a publication, a publisher, what would you say would be some of the most, what's your process to submitting works to your publications?
Mm-hmm. So for pretty much everything outside of wind band, we accept unsolicited submissions. We have an easy, online submission form on our website that you attach scores and recordings and such too. So, that part's fairly simple. As far as the reviewing process, you're looking at any number of factors. Is this person high school student? This is their first or second piece. You can kind of see that in the quality of the material. And so, one of the things that is asked to attach is your bio. And so we get to see, where somebody is in their career. And, we're in such a different time right now for publishing too, in that there are so many options out there that were not there, like when I was starting out, like in the early 2000s, we didn't have all the social media outlets to share your music with thousands or millions of people around the world. So going the traditional publishing route made a lot of sense for me, but for some people that have written a really nice piece that's already had a great performance, their trajectory might already be, pretty steep. And, so they might not want to go the publishing route. So I guess the way that I approach it is, okay, is this somebody that we can build a relationship with? I just took over the company. I've been with the company, I said, for over 20 years, but I just took over as owner in January 2020. And when I took over, that was one of the big things for me was, how can we cultivate relationships, like individual relationships, not just kind of as a, one group of huge group of composers, but how can we cultivate relationships individually and grow from there? And I mentioned David Gillingham earlier, and David came on board with us really right there at the start of the pinnacle of his wind band career. It was really some of his big heavy hitting pieces were right when he came on board with us, and it was because the other company he was with went under, and so his stuff he just needed a home for everything. And so that's been a great working relationship between the company and and composer, both personally and professionally. So we just try to treat people well and build things from there. I don't know that that's really answering your question.
It is. It's precisely what I want, and exactly where this first part of the interview is going to kind of wrap up things. We have like twice as many more questions that we've developed after this going forward, and I would love to have you back on for a secondary interview because right there is a great way to juncture into both what we have going on currently, and making room for our families and such like that. I really do appreciate your time and your intentionality and your willingness to be part of this International Euphonium Summit. And for everybody that's watching, listening right now, and have questions or want to understand something more, or want to dive into maybe possibly commissioning something from Dr. Nathan Daughtrey, reach out by all means, or leave a message below if this impacted you or helped you on your journey. Please let us know if that has happened, or if you get to be part of that wind ensemble with Euphonium premiering soon, and perhaps perform it in your own middle school band at some future date. Let us know. Let me know for sure. Love to get to listen in on that. Thank you so much, Dr. Daughtrey, for coming.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah, what a thrill! What an opportunity for our composers that are listening to, as well as euphonium artists, to get to know, and for those parents of and loved ones of these artists who are watching. Thank you so much on behalf of them, behalf of what's going on. This is truly inspiring. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. It's my pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks everyone for stopping by.